I was sitting here this morning, not really trying to figure anything out. I was just thinking, and I want to make that clear from the beginning. I'm not a physicist, a geologist, or a mathematician. I'm not trying to prove that the Earth is flat, and I'm not trying to prove that it's a globe. I'm not trying to prove some alternative cosmology either. I don't know, and that's actually part of the point. I don't like planting my feet somewhere and saying, this is what I believe, and that's the end of it, because there's always another perspective and there's always something else to learn. At the same time, you've got to be careful with that. You can open your mind so far that your mind falls right out of your head. Every possibility doesn't suddenly become true simply because you can imagine it. But I do think there's value in asking strange questions without immediately needing an answer. So I started thinking about water. Imagine I'm standing on the shore of an enormous body of water. Forget the waves for a minute, forget the wind and all the little complications. This is just a thought experiment. I've got one point where I'm standing and another point on some distant shore. Now imagine a line following the surface of the water from my point all the way to that distant point. Then imagine another line. This one goes downward, following the general descent into the ocean, getting deeper and deeper. Eventually, if we're moving toward another shore, that line has to start coming upward again until it reaches land on the other side. So I've got two shores and 2 points, with one path going across the surface and another descending into the basin and eventually rising out again. And I started wondering what exactly I'm looking at. When I walk into a lake or an ocean, the water gets deeper because the ground underneath me gets lower. That's obvious enough. The water has gathered into the lower region. But then my mind starts going toward the idea of the abyss, because you can imagine going down deeper and deeper, and something strange happens in the mind when you do that. We naturally imagine looking upward into something potentially endless. We can stare into the night sky and entertain the possibility of infinity without much trouble. But when we look downward, our minds seem to want a floor. Why? I'm not claiming there isn't one. We've measured enormous amounts of seafloor. We have sonar and direct observations, and we know there is physical ground beneath the oceans. I'm asking something slightly different. Why does the mind treat up and down so differently? Why does infinity feel imaginable in one direction and almost absurd in the other? Then there's water itself. Everything I've personally experienced with water tells me that water finds level. Put it in a glass and tilt the glass. Put it in a bathtub, a pool, or a lake. The container changes, the bottom changes, and the surroundings change, but the surface seeks level. Science tells us that on the scale of the Earth, level doesn't mean an infinitely straight plane through space. It means a surface responding to gravity, so under that model, countless locally level regions together form a curved surface around the Earth. Okay, that's the explanation. But there's still something interesting to me about the difference between the explanation and the immediate experience. I don't experience curvature when I look across water. I experience level. That doesn't prove anything by itself because human senses obviously have limits, but it raises another question that interests me. Where does observation end and interpretation begin? Suppose something is too far away for my eyes to resolve, and then a camera zooms in and suddenly I can see it. That doesn't automatically prove anything about the shape of the Earth either. Zoom, atmospheric refraction, perspective, resolution, and geometry all have to be separated from one another. But philosophically, something interesting happens. My senses reach their limit, and then somebody tells me what's happening beyond that limit. Maybe they're correct. Maybe they've measured it using methods far better than my eyes could ever provide. But I still think it's healthy to ask how they know. And I don't mean that sarcastically. I mean it literally. Show me the chain. What was observed and what was measured? What assumptions were necessary? What does the instrument actually detect, and what interpretation was placed upon that detection? That's where I think questioning becomes useful. I'm not interested in saying everybody is lying, and I'm equally uninterested in saying that scientists said something, therefore nobody should question it. I want to understand how we got from the observation to the conclusion. Then another strange thought hit me. If I accept the globe model for the sake of the thought experiment, there's somebody standing on the opposite side of the Earth from me right now. From where I'm standing, he's upside down. Of course, from where he's standing, I'm the one who's upside down. Neither one of us experiences himself that way. We're both standing normally. Planes are flying on that side of the world. People are walking around, drinking coffee, driving cars, and going to work. If I could somehow stand outside the whole thing and look at both sides at once, one entire group of people would appear inverted relative to the other. That's strange. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just strange when you actually stop and picture it. Suddenly words like up, down, left, and right aren't quite as simple as they seemed 5 minutes ago. Imagine two people standing on opposite sides of the Earth along the equator and tell both of them to go right. Right according to whom? Each person knows perfectly well what his own right is, but there isn't some enormous arrow floating outside the Earth telling the entire universe which direction is right. Their directions are relative to where they're standing and which way they're facing. So maybe I tell one person to go right and the other person to go left. Depending on how they're oriented, they could eventually meet. Turn them around and they could walk away from each other. Keep walking around the same path long enough and one could eventually arrive where the other started. There's something almost mirror-like about that. Imagine the person directly opposite me raises his right arm while I raise my right arm. Both of us have raised our own right arms, but depending on the standpoint from which I'm imagining the scene, one can appear reversed relative to the other. Nothing physically changed. The standpoint changed. That interested me because I've spent a lot of time thinking about opposites. Left and right don't exist by themselves. You need a standpoint to distinguish them. Above and below also need a standpoint, and even the phrase upside down requires one. Remove the observer and ask which person on a sphere is really upside down, and the question starts falling apart. Then I started thinking about the poles. What exactly are the poles, and how did we determine where they were? At first, I even mixed the equator up with temperature. I thought you could basically walk until it gets hotter and hotter, and when it starts getting colder again, turn around and say, yep, somewhere back there was the equator. Obviously, that's not actually how the equator is defined. The equator is geometric. It's halfway between the geographic poles. Then magnetism enters the picture. A compass responds to Earth's magnetic field. Near the equator, a compass can still point roughly north and south. Near the magnetic poles, things become stranger because the field isn't simply lying horizontally beneath you. Then there's another distinction. The geographic poles and the magnetic poles aren't exactly the same thing. Again, there's another layer and another reference. Then somebody says the Earth is tilted about 23.5 degrees, and my immediate question is, tilted relative to what? A ball floating in space doesn't have some universal straight up. There isn't a ceiling above the universe telling us which direction is upright. The answer is that the tilt is defined relative to the plane of Earth's orbit around the Sun. Naturally, then I ask what an orbital plane is. Again, it isn't a giant physical plate sitting underneath the solar system. It's a geometric reference constructed from the observed path. Okay, but look at how many layers of reference have already appeared. North and south, east and west, left and right, rotation, axis, pole, equator, orbital plane, and tilt. None of those words are meaningless. They're extremely useful, but they become meaningful through relationships. That fascinates me because we're accustomed to thinking that reality simply contains these directions as independent things, when so much of what we're actually describing is relational. Where are you standing? What are you facing? What are you measuring against? What is your reference, and what is the other thing doing relative to you? Maybe that's why the image of two people standing upside down from each other struck me as so strange. It's almost like a mirror. Each person is upright within his own world. Each can point upward and downward, and each has a left hand and a right hand, yet from another standpoint, the entire orientation appears reversed. That led me into thinking about the Earth itself. We're told it has poles, it rotates, and it has a magnetic field. Its rotational axis has a particular orientation relative to its path around the sun. The oceans move, the atmosphere moves, there are zones of radiation around it, there's an ozone-rich region of the atmosphere, and there are electrical and magnetic phenomena everywhere. And life is happening inside all of this. Eventually, I stopped thinking of it simply as an object and started thinking about how ordered the whole thing appears. There are relationships nested inside relationships, polarity and rotation, cycles and fields, heat and water, matter and life. Then those patterns seem to echo downward into smaller scales through atoms, molecules, cells, and bodies. They also echo through symbols human beings have been using for thousands of years: the eye and the womb, above and below, the abyss and the poles, the center, birth and death, descent and return. That's where the Bible came into my thoughts. In Genesis, the waters are gathered together and dry land appears. There are waters above and waters below. Later, in the flood story, the fountains of the great deep break open and the windows of heaven open. I'm not saying Genesis is secretly giving us a scientific diagram of the planet. That's exactly the kind of leap I'm trying not to make. I'm interested in the image of waters being gathered, land emerging, waters above, the deep below, and the abyss. Ancient people were looking at the same basic mystery we're looking at. They didn't have satellites or particle accelerators, but they had eyes, dreams, death, birth, water, and the sky. And they had the same basic question we still have. What the hell is this place? Our vocabulary has become more sophisticated. Our instruments have become unbelievably powerful, and our mathematics has become more precise. But eventually, if you keep asking, what is that? Long enough, you hit another mystery. Water is H2O. Okay, what's hydrogen and what's oxygen? What are atoms? What's a proton? What's a quark? What's a field? What's energy? Then keep going. What is that and what is that made of? Eventually, language starts running out. We've become very good at describing relationships and behavior. We can describe how one thing interacts with another, how a certain amount produces a certain result, or how a field behaves according to an equation. That's incredibly useful knowledge. But there's still another question underneath all of it. What is it? Maybe that's why I started thinking about dreams. When I'm dreaming, there's a world. There's ground beneath me, and there can be roads, cars, people, sunlight, distance, speed, buildings, and history. Maybe I'm driving a car down a road. Inside the dream, I don't ask who manufactured the automobile. I don't ask who paved the road or where the first tree came from. Everything is simply already there, and while I'm dreaming, it can be as real as anything. Then I wake up. Suddenly I understand that none of those things needed the kind of beginning I would have assumed they needed while I was inside that world. That doesn't mean waking reality is literally a dream. Again, I'm not making that leap. I'm asking what the analogy does to the question. We constantly talk about creation, but do human beings actually create anything? Plant a seed and you didn't create the seed. Build a house and you didn't create matter. Have a child and you participated in a process that was already here. Write a song and even though you're working with sound, memory, language, experience, and emotion, all things that were already present in some form. We rearrange things, participate in things, and transform things. Things become through us and around us. But creation from absolute nothing? Where have we ever witnessed that? So when we ask how reality itself was created, maybe the word already carries assumptions that don't belong in the question. Maybe there was no first seed in the way we imagine a first seed. Maybe we're asking for the beginning because our minds experience sequences. One thing happens and then another thing happens. We observe cause and effect, then another cause and another effect, and eventually we demand to know what the first cause was. But what if reality isn't obligated to fit the structure our minds use to understand events occurring inside reality? I don't know. That's where I keep ending up, and strangely, I'm becoming more comfortable there. There's a difference between ignorance and recognizing the boundary of your knowledge. I'm sitting in an apartment thinking about oceans I've barely seen, physics I haven't studied professionally, mathematics I'm not particularly good at, instruments I've never operated, and places I'll probably never personally visit. So I'm not going to pretend I've solved cosmology over a cup of coffee. That would be ridiculous. But I also don't think curiosity belongs exclusively to specialists. You can ask questions and wonder about things. You can take the accepted explanation seriously without worshiping it, examine an alternative without believing it, and hold two possibilities in your mind without immediately choosing one. Maybe that's becoming harder for people. Everybody wants you on a side. They want yes or no, true or false, globe or flat, material or spiritual, science or religion. Pick one, defend it, and build your identity around it. I'm not interested in doing that. I'd rather look into the space between them, because sometimes what we're missing isn't sitting at either pole. It might be somewhere in between. There is an enormous amount we don't know, and there is probably an even greater amount we don't know that we don't know. Our knowledge keeps changing because our ability to observe keeps changing. A new instrument doesn't simply give us another answer. Sometimes it gives us an entirely new question. Eventually, there may be discoveries that force us to rethink things we currently consider obvious. That's happened before, and it'll happen again. So this isn't me telling anybody what the Earth is, what the universe is, or even what I believe. These are just questions that came into my mind while I was sitting here this morning. Why does water behave the way it does, and what exactly does level mean? What is an abyss, and why do we imagine infinity above us more easily than below us? What does it mean for somebody to be upside down if both of us experience ourselves as upright? Where exactly do left and right exist when you remove the observer, and what is a direction without a reference point? Where does direct observation end and interpretation begin? What does it actually mean to create something? And how much of reality are we unable to recognize simply because we've inherited the language through which we're trying to see it? Maybe some of those questions have straightforward answers, and maybe some of my premises are wrong. That's fine. Correct them, and then I'll have something new to think about. Because I'm not looking for something to believe. I'm looking. And those are not the same thing. Amen. Let it be so.